imagery of the divided vertebrae. But it occurred to me that within the academy, we don't really need to have that much of a distinction between the humanities and the non-humanities.
No, we don't.
And I was wondering if you didn't have all these sort of historic or reactionary reasons for defining the humanities, how would you like to define the different ways we understand everything around us?
Well, I mean, I think in some ways you've said it, in a way that I would want to, and that is, we have to define everything around us, regardless of what, our perspective is, with a sense of the whole, right? So that the human in mathematics, which we often don't think of as, being twinned together if we're from outside that discipline. I was lucky enough to have a physics major in Intro to Literary Interpretation a couple of semesters ago, and I will say, concretely, one of the things that could happen would be to open up more opportunities like that. It was so wonderful to have that person in the class because we were talking about truth status and truth status in the classroom, and people were saying about somebody's model of pedagogy which was radically open. Well, this wouldn't work for teaching language or math, and because that's all about certainty and facts. And this physics major said, I beg your pardon, there's much that is very uncertain and incredibly creative and debatable in physics, and that just was an eye-opener for students in English. So if we could open up some of those gates that have been erected for whatever set of reasons, administratively, or because of resources, or because of sometimes lack of understanding, that would be incredibly helpful. And certainly I don't think that that our disciplines are part of that fractured vertebrae at the level of the professoriate and the level of the students. I see lots of amazingly rich work going on there, and I'll just say that Louise Economides, who's here, is the director of what's the title, Louise? Environmental studies. It's not environmental studies. It's literature in the environment in the English department. It's a sub-focus, right? We just went over and talked to Nikki, who's here, in climate change. Nikki, and we talked about, putting these things together, right? Putting science and storytelling together. I mean, in some ways they're not all that different, but then they're also incredibly complementary. And then one story that I often tell when I'm talking about how these things, can be put together, how different disciplines can be put together, is I make reference to an article by a friend of mine, Nandi Bhatia. She's Punjabi, and her parents and her grandparents underwent the partition in India. And she just says straight out, I don't care how many times you tell me how many millions of people moved from, East and West Pakistan to India, and, back and forth, how many, tens of thousands of women were raped, how many people were killed. That will not, penetrate your consciousness. What will is story. Eventually you'll build up a callus, and I've said this to my students before, and what can penetrate that callus is narrative, right? So statistics are incredibly important, so too is the story that, lurks behind them. Yes.
So this kind of relates to the last question. I'm wondering if it's necessary to define marginalized groups, like assign them labels, when you're fighting for their rights, and like what are the dangers of doing that? Like, how can we keep our identity from straying too far from the collective?
Yeah. Okay, so everybody who's had a class with me, the 300 literary interpretation class, you can go to sleep now, or doodle, or check your Instagram accounts. There's a really great post-colonial theorist, Edward Said, who says that in order to understand identity politics, the kind of things that certain people call political correctness, in the contemporary moment, you have to understand the epistemology of imperialism. Imperialism divided the world into two groups and said that those groups were incommensurate with one another. So it talked about things like the Oriental mind, right, as opposed to the Occidental mind. And so those are the roots. You have to understand that history. Then you have to understand what he calls the great nationalist projects of Ireland, of India, of South Africa. You have to understand how they used nationalism and how civil rights movements in our own country used nationalism as a necessary weapon or force against imperial epistemology, this kind of way of thinking of the world as divided in two. And so there's an interval in which that's absolutely necessary, that people have to, in order to engage in collective action, they have to come together as a people. We can't just all be like people in support of queer rights, right? Everybody get together, No, I mean, there are, different constituencies within that. There's a trans group, there is a, gay men's group, there's a queer women's group. All of those identities are necessary for political mobilization and articulation of goals, right? But then Said goes on, citing Fanon in this wonderful piece called The Politics of Knowledge, to say that Fanon says nationalism is only meant for an interval, and then you need to emerge into social, consciousness. But the tricky thing is, how long is that interval, right? I mean, in North Dakota, that interval is going to have to be a hell of a lot longer than like our lifetime, probably, for there to be a sense of the common good or the common territory of that state. So, yeah.
I was just thinking about what you were saying about just how we're trying to protect the humanities, and then thinking about right-wing rhetoric. And is there a strategy sort of in our education system in, I don't know how long this has been going on or how to think about it historically right now, but if we dismantle the humanities, and I show my bias here, are we talking about a strategy to dismantle critical thinking?
Well, I guess
that's like a big question.
It's a huge question. And I mean, I guguess part of what Butler's asking, and part of what I'm asking is or what I'm hoping for, not like I'm asking, but is for us to rethink the humanities and to rethink linkages and to think about, critical thinking and radical reexamination. And so I don't think we necessarily, have to keep like the term the humanities or, the old stars keep their places or anything like that. Like, let there be art history as separate, from, you do the work of bringing together film and poetry. I mean, that's, amazing. It's still within the humanities, but again, what would it be, as they're doing in NAS, to bring together astronomy and history, right? And to, join those fields together in order to make points about, the historical past for, say, like the Pagan people, right? So I think it's about imagining a new kind of dispensation while protecting what we have and defending it against those people who really see us as the humanities and as diminished, right? Diminished and kind of, now this is a Lord of the Rings reference, oh my God. Diminished and going into the West, goodbye, you're not STEM, you're not worthy, you're not valuable, right? And how do we convince those people otherwise, in dialogue? Yes.
I really appreciate what you're presenting here, the dynamics of the action along with the theory. And this discussion is very exciting as well. Redefining humanities. You kind of did that in the footnote at the beginning. I'd just like to bring it back to that term from Stanford's definition, connections.
Yes.
And I wonder if there isn't really a further conversation trying to find a language for what those connections might be.
Yeah, and I mean, I have absolutely no answers to that at all, but I'm extremely excited in the possibility of talking about that. But given the way that our institution is prioritizing its activities and its missions right now, that's not what's happening. I mean, look at, what's happening out in Oregon. I'm assuming that faculty were brought together to begin to, put those courses together, right, that Clark was talking about, the VP. Where, is our administration, in asking us to do this? And I mean, I know there are a lot of people who say the responsibility for that, rests partially on us. And I think, that's true, but I think it's also the case There was a big article in the New York Times the other day about the, general speed up of work in the United States. But we are all really, really overworked. Space has to be made. I went to the university, or Ohio State University, for a job interview at one point, and they took me to the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies, which was its own building, glowing on campus. And you just went in there, and they had people who were incredibly invested in it, professors, staff members, who would say, oh, okay, so Ann Little from the Sunshine, coffee company, or ex-Sunshine Coffee Company, and now Moonrise Kitchens, you want to talk about food and culture, and so does Pragita, and so does Rachel from a Marxist perspective, and so do I. Let's get together, let's sit down. They would make space and time, cookies and coffee, and they would find ways to spring you from your other courses, funding, all kinds of stuff. It was amazing. I'm really glad I didn't get that job, but I often think I'm so glad I'm in Missoula. I won't go into that, but you can tell how tempted I am. Why? Like I have a hostage audience and I want to go, okay, in 1999. But, I often think about that center. I think, God damn it, why can't we have something like that here where somebody helps us to facilitate? And that's what I'd like to see, our administration doing in the face of, the threats to funding, right? And they would be doing it if they were interested in hearing from us. But from my perspective, there's too little listening and there's a lot of talking. So, Marty?
Yeah, thanks, Katie, very much for all the food for thought that you talked with us tonight. Coming to 1999, Cicero, it strikes me that a lot of what you're talking about has to do with time, and your reconnection to the root of radical is very much appreciated there. I think people tend to, in fact, see the opposite contemporary understanding of the concept. And I'm struck by your delineation of radical versus moderate. There's an inherent classical quality to radicalism, right?
Right.
It has to do with essence, and it has to do with abstraction. And I think another way of comparing that with the moderate is it comes from mode, which relates to time. And it struck me through your
That's
talk,
interesting.
Yeah,
That's really
how,
interesting.
so much of what we're dealing with coming to the title that you shared with us, into the darkness, we have to get over this constant now, right? There's such an inherent nihilism to the myth of immediacy, which should bring us back to understanding where we're coming from, to give us some sense of the possibilities of where we're going. And as cliche as that might sound, it's really about the latter. And I personally have a great concern about the veneration of the ongoing now, which, in effect is the opening of a door to this darkness that you're talking about without the backdrop of, the backlight, as it were. And I'm wondering if you might.
Well, no, I think that's incredibly interesting and far surpasses me in what I can do with the classics. In fact, I was like, is Kinch here? Like maybe he can, weigh in. Yeah, there he is. Yeah. I put Cicero, and I actually put Cicero and Pliny in there going, we'll see what Ashby says about this. But I mean, I think that the radical is concerned with, with what's in front of you right now, as well as the past. And so, in certain ways, the radical is about, getting away from that kind of focus on the absolute present, on the, Baudrillardian simulacrum, if you will, right? And then, yes, I mean, one of the things that one learns if one takes up the study of America from a non-white perspective is the way in which this is just another, as those scholars at ASA were telling us, is just another iteration, and that, our bewilderment and surprise and unreadiness is a sign of, a whole host of things, starting with privilege, right? And so, yeah, that taking that, mode and temporal long view is, I think, incredibly important and contained in the word radical for sure.
I mean, it amounts to a kind of battle of how, we understand history. from the now, it involves a projection of how we want to define this idea of tradition and
Yes.
principles from which we
Yes.
supposedly are to continue from this.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And just to answer that, or just to say one thing back to that, I mean, it has been a constant source of amazement to me once the door opened to me, to use your language, on Haiti, to everywhere be confronted with its absence. The disappearance of Haiti, Ralph Trouillard's, magisterial book about Haiti, just asks the question, where's Haiti in our understanding of the emancipation of the human individual, right? If we put that into the picture, and we redefine our traditions to include that, things look quite different than they do if you just take the French and American revolutions. Haitian Revolution was really the most successful for reasons I won't go into right now. Kay Chanley.
I'm not sure how to say this, but I'll start with a story like you. This is my chamber. That last night I teach a class in the evening, Indigenous class, and I was walking to the car, and David Giarge, who's the visiting man for India, he and I were standing and talking, and I was going to veer off the car, and then he said to me, "Did you see those naked men?" And I was so lost in thought, I didn't see that 6 naked men had so I turned around.
Kate! Get
I turned
woke!
around and I just saw the one bouncy butt. So that was funny in the sense that I am capable of the kind of conversation depth where naked people can run. So I headed to my car, and there was a pickup truck, and they had their lights shining on the little red brick road, and the back of the pickup was maybe 5 young people, some women, some men, and then 3 guys in the cab, and they were all laughing it up to watch clearly it was a hazing or something.
Right.
And because my son is dark skinned, I had a different take. When I saw them, it felt chilling to me, because I realized they were making a spectacle of suffering. And I know it's not very good natured of me to have lost my sense of humor at that moment, but I did. And I thought about this election and how many of the people I know don't know a single Trump voter or supporter that were separated from each other in an objectifying way. And once you can objectify the other in that way and think of their suffering as a spectacle, then it can go from one thing to another. Just like I thought that those young people in the pickup with enough booze could turn on someone like my son and see his suffering in a particular way.
And that's absolutely why K through 12 and the university has got to commit to, civic mindedness. I mean, I call it, in this talk, critical thinking, right? But I mean, it happens again and again and again. And to tell you a story from my early days at University of Texas, and one of my best kind of pedagogical moments. And in some ways, I wish I could just turn this over to, educators like Sarah Kahn, who's working in the juvenile justice system and who's a prison abolitionist and who could, answer this question better than I could, but or answer your provocation or respond to your provocation better than I could. But I had a student in a freshman rhetoric and composition class at the University of Texas where they had just a spectacular training program. So we really knew what we were doing by the time we got into the classroom. And I was talking about definition arguments and establishing criteria and then matching criteria as part of definition argument. And he said, "Oh, so you mean like fags aren't normal?" And I just like stopped the class and like went on like the rest of the class. The 30 minutes was a long rant, kind of like you saw me getting into, here. I started talking about my family. I started talking about, rhetoric, and 60% of people at the University of Texas are either queer affiliated. You're alienating your audience. This is the, new, sort of, and of course we're back to where we started, but this is the new sort of racism of the 1990s. It's just so easy. Everybody goes around, saying, oh, that's so gay, blah, 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 blah. This guy followed me back to my office. He was so angry with me. He was just like, furious. You called me out. You made me feel small. I don't like this, I talked to him. I kept talking to him throughout the semester. We didn't get back onto easy terms, but he talked also to everybody else in the class, right? Not just to me, but to everybody in our learning community. And at the end of the semester, he came up to me and he said, you know what? I realized that's my dad. That's not even me. I don't really even believe that. I'm just saying what I was trained to say. I never took a look at it. And there's this, I hate to get all kind of sentimental and evangelical, but there's this window, that education provides where people can begin to interrogate their own roots, right? And figure out what they mean. And there was an instance of that young man doing that. He went on to go to law school, is, a deep progressive now, but only because he was lucky enough to be at an institution that committed to critical thinking, not in one little class or not in one little balkanized area, but, at least in the English department throughout. So you had to take rhetoric and composition several times. What are your arguments? What are your claims? How can you, make this case for yourself? So, and I think you were right to be displeased with that display of spectacularized, suffering and hazing. Just as an aside, I would have not been amused by it either. Although bouncing thoughts are nice. Yes, Lizzie.
So this is just something Eli and I have a class together, and we were talking about this in my class the other day. Have you heard of slacktivism?
Yes, that's a slightly familiar term for me, but you couldn't define it.
This is just something for you to like chew and spit out if you want. Thinking about social media and thinking about like even just the election, thinking about North Dakota and how much is happening on social media. In one way, it's good, but then we're thinking about the decline of activism, of actual activism. What are your thoughts on social media's place in activism? And I mean, I love this. You're calling for action, like we need to do something. That's just like a
well, I mean, that's such a huge question, and I'm not sure that I'm, fully qualified to answer it, but I think about conversations I've had with Casey and readings I've done of Bell Hooks's where, one of the things, or Stuart Hall is really good on this, one of the things that's always necessary for any action, and Antonio Gramsci says, theory is always necessary before action. An interval of theory is necessary before action, except for puppets on a string. And so, as Casey once said to me, any good, intellectual or activist project always has to have an imminent critique of itself, right? And one of the things that, slacktivism has to confront is the way in which activism can so easily be turned into cultural capital, right? And it means you have to be careful about what you're posting. I mean, I just posted something this morning, and then I got into the shower, and I couldn't get out of the shower quick enough to get that down because I realized, that's actually not something you should be posting. And you didn't post it in the right way, and you need to spend some time thinking about it instead of just getting on there and clicking, right? And so, I mean, that's one of the key things is thinking about, where you are in relationship to, your slacktivism and what your goals are, right? Is it more, selfieism? Is it more self-framing? Or is it really about participating in action? And I will tell you that, and this is why it's so disheartening that there isn't more media coverage, or there's this just very disconnected and sort of off-base media coverage of what's going on in North Dakota. The other day there was something on CBS that just wanted to focus on the snow and look at the tents and how horrible the conditions are. And my brother Bart and I were talking, he said, "Oh God, you know, I mean, come on. Did they not know that the Mandan, the Hidatsa, the Arikara, the Lakota lived in that area for thousands of years in heavy snow, worse conditions, you know, than what then people can live in this, right? But if you study what is going on around Standing Rock, I think you will see what a really healthy kind of active, social media activism looks like. There's a lot of self-policing. There is a lot of humbleness around, who gets to, make the, main postings, right? So people checking in with stuff, checking with sites that are, known to be authoritative, and, listening to people who say, stop posting the chemicals were being dumped on this site, it's not true, it's not helpful to our cause. That's a very vital, and I'm kind of getting lost in the weeds of detail here, that's a very vital kind of social activist formation. Ted Van Alst from NAS said Native Americans were the earliest adapters of Facebook, and demographically, although Facebook doesn't identify by race, they're the largest ethnic group. And they've used it incredibly well and successfully in order to, gosh, I just saw one of David's relatives, Joy Brown, on the Indigenous Environmental Activists website 2 days ago, right after the snow, and she was saying, okay, people, people from not North Dakota, here's how you deal with snow, okay? Do you have your winter kit, right? I mean, there's that kind of stuff that goes on, as well as here they come, here's the Army Corps of Engineer. My brother is completely hampered because he's not on Facebook, so he calls me all the time, what's happening? I'm like, well, here's what's happening. I'm sending you this information from a Facebook page, right? It's all on Facebook if you want to know about Standing Rock. And we had one of the founders of Black Lives Matter here, and she just basically said the same thing. Without Facebook, we would be nowhere. And so I guess one of the things that we need to do is ask questions about what distinguishes those kinds of, social, media groupings, and what's the difference between people at the core, people at the periphery, or allies, and people who are, directly affected. But I would never, ever, ever throw the baby out with the bathwater there. I have a lot of respect for social media, and I wish I could do more to harness it in the classroom. I just am not tech savvy enough to do that. I need to call on somebody like Henry. People sometimes say, and you don't want them using their phones. And I'm like, the hell I don't want them using their phones, because they look stuff up and correct me. They say, hey, that happened in 1810, or no, there weren't, 2 million people involved. There were like 10, So, I mean, how do we harness that, and so, yeah. What class is that?
What's the name of that class?
Incorporating technology into the classroom.
I should be taking that class. I should be taking it.
I call it PowerPoint class.
You've already
Okay, then maybe
mastered
you should be
that.
teaching it. Yeah, Sam. Thanks, Lizzie.
So I'm a medical professional. I
And
do
an
most of
intellectual.
most of my notes in shorthand, so I'm not very literature oriented, but it does bring me back to 15 years ago when I was practicing. It was, you look at the shoulder, you don't look at anything else. And now, as physical therapists, we're looking at the whole body and seeing much better results, and the broader community of the medical world is really looking at the whole integrated system. Oh, wow, the brain is in control of
Yes.
so much more, and oh, mental health and physical health actually are one and the same, and we need to cover them
Yes.
through health insurance.
Yeah.
And I feel like seeing that in my own world, right, my little capsule where I go every day, not the university, I feel like what you guys are saying as far as like in the university system, the school system, we need to integrate the whole system and
Yes.
integrate everything. And coming back to another story that I remember, before I was a PT, one of my mentors said you have to have utmost empathy, but don't do sympathy. And not pitying people, but really understanding people.
Right.
Or like not judging people, but understanding. I think that
as a whole, we need to integrate that into education as well as the medical system too. But
And Sam, you say you're not in the humanities there with your etymological self. Come on,
I am a
distinguish
UM
you.
graduate, thank you.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I mean that, systems analysis, and one of my favorite thinkers is Emanuel Wallerstein, and he, is very much a Marxist, but the world system, right, and thinking of things globally instead of just like, gosh, why is coal disappearing, here, and how can we get it back, as opposed to thinking about change. And I'm sorry, I just want to give a shout out to these two fabulous women over here from Alpine PT, who are very much intellectuals, Ange and Sam, so I'm really happy to see you here tonight, and they can treat your body like you would never believe. As a whole, if your butt is bouncing or if it is not. Is that it? Are we tired? I think we're tired. Okay, thanks you guys.